Good morning, everyone. So we continue that with we're getting from good to better, by the way. So we're going to start getting to. I anticipate there's a good chance we will actually start chapter 1. By the way, everything we've been doing until now has been an introduction. And just as an introduction to today's class, I'd like to share with you once again a story. This is a classic story of the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement. Yesterday and the day before, Shabbos and Sunday were the 19th and 20th day of Kislev. They are what we call the Rosh Hashanah of Hasidus. It's the day that the Alter Rebbe was redeemed from prison, and therefore, from on high, it was a blessing being given to him to continue spreading his teachings, which are essentially the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov in a very distinct and clear fashion. And we just started the annual cycle of the study of Tanya, where we study a small piece of Tanya, of the book of Tanya, written by the Alter Rebbe every single day. And it concludes next year on 19th day of Kislev. And if you are not participating in that annual study, I just want to encourage you to do so. And you can do that very easily. You can simply go on to Chabad.org and you can listen to Rabbi Gordon, who is very, very popular and well-known even amongst our group right here. And just listen and get whatever you can get out of every day's Tanya. And sometimes you'll get more, sometimes less. But slowly, as I said in our Kabbalah course, it will slowly seep in more and more, and it will have a tremendous impact, very positive and deep impact on your life. So it's just an encouragement. So the Baal Shem Tov, who was the founder of the Hasidic movement,
Rabbi, could I ask a quick question? You said
yes.
on Chabad.org, is it something? It's like a video that we can just listen to. It's daily. That's posted on the website.
Yes. So what you can do is you can go to Chabad.org daily study,
okay,
which you should see on the top of the homepage, or just search Chabad the daily study and it'll show up. And one of the things in daily study will be Tanya.
Got it.
And another thing that you can do is get the app, the daily study, Chabad daily study app. And then you have it on your phone.
Okay. Perfect.
And wherever you go, you have it. Great. Okay.
Thank you.
Yes. Today is still the introduction. Today and tomorrow is the introduction to the Tanya that the Alter Rebbe wrote, the foreword of why he's writing the book of Tanya. So today's a great day to jump in. Yesterday were the approbations, rabbis who were writing support to the book. But today's the actual studies beginning, so it's a perfect day to start. So the Baal Shem Tov was the founder of the Hasidic movement. He was a great man of God. A man of God means someone who is a living version of this book, amongst many other things, but a living version. And the Baal Shem Tov would, on occasion, take his students on a ride in his wagon, and they would go travel somewhere, horse and buggy. They would go travel somewhere where he had to take care of some divine mission. And one time, he told the students, would you like to come on a ride with me? So, of course, they said yes, and they got into his wagon, and they traveled to an inn, which we call in Yiddish, and I think it's Russian too. Some of my friends have told me, a krechma. Is that Russian? Someone give me a nod. Mila, can you nod? Well, I don't know if it's Yiddish, right? I know we use it in Yiddish. But anyway, it's an inn. And inns it was very common in the days of the Baal Shem Tov, which was about 300 plus years ago, for Jews to be innkeepers. Why? Because in Poland, where many of the Ashkenazi Jews lived, the way the country it functioned was that there were many different landowners who we would call a paritz in the Yiddish terminology. I'm forgetting the English translation for that, how we say it in English. But anyway, they would own big, vast swaths of land. And on that land, they had farms and they had inns for people who were traveling, all these different things. and Jews weren't allowed to own land. So what they would do is they would lease the inn from the Paritz, and the squire, actually, from the squire, as we would say in English, and they would make a living. It's like, you rent a shop and you do business. So they would rent this inn, and then people would pay to sleep over, and also people would pay for drinks. The local Polish drunks would come every night and buy drinks, and that was another way that Jews would make money. The issue was that these squires were very oppressive. And if a Jew didn't do well one year because maybe it was too strong of a winter, people weren't traveling as much, or whatever the story was, then the squire would say, if you don't pay the rent, I'm going to put you in prison. And in prison in those days, it wasn't like it wasn't an American prison, which is no pleasant place either, but it was a hole in the ground that was sealed. So it was a very terrifying experience. And there are many stories about Jews who fell into these situations and had to be redeemed from prison. But anyway, so the Baal Shem Tov traveled with his students to this particular inn, which was leased by a Jewish innkeeper. And they stay overnight, and in the morning, the innkeeper offers them breakfast. And before they even sit down to eat, an officer, a policeman, walks into the inn, and he comes over to the table, and he takes a stick and he bangs 3 times. It's a strange event. And then he walks out. The innkeeper seemed totally disregarded what happened, so everyone ignored it. Whatever. They sit down, they're eating breakfast, and whatever it is, they're spending time talking and this and that. And after a few hours, suddenly the officer comes back in, same guy, same stick. He bangs on the table 3 times while they're all sitting there. And again, the innkeeper doesn't respond to it at all. So the Baal Shem Tov asks him, what's going on here? Why did the officer come a few hours ago, and why is he coming back and banging on the table? He says, we have there's a policy in my agreement that when my rent is overdue and I haven't paid it and it meets the deadline, then they send a policeman to come in and inform me. And he comes in and he informs me 3 times. And after the 3rd time, if I don't pay the rent, I'm put into prison. So Baal Shem Tov said, that's what's going on. So he said, obviously from your demeanor, you're very calm. You must have the money. You're just hosting us, and when you're done, you'll go and pay the money. You go pay the rent. So the innkeeper says, well, the truth of the matter is I don't have the money. But I'm not concerned. Hashem is going to provide me with the money when I need it. So the Baal Shem Tov, brought his students for this very reason. And that was quite impressive to see a man who's like hosting. There's not a worry in his mind. And then they finish their meal. They bench this man. There's like nothing's going on. Of course, shortly thereafter, the officer comes back and he bangs on the table 3 times again. So the innkeeper says, okay, you'll have to excuse me, but I'm going to need to get up and go to the Paritz, to the squire, to pay my rent. So he goes, puts on his jacket, his coat, whatever it is, and he gets ready to leave. And the Baal Shem Tov says, do you have the money? So the man says, no. So he says, what are you going to give the squire? You're going to give him money. You don't have the money. He said, Hashem's going to provide. Between here and me walking all the way, whatever's a few miles to the Paritz's palace, plenty of things can happen. Hashem's going to provide. And the man was calm as a feather. He leaves the inn and he starts walking down this long road. And the Baal Shem Tov goes out to the porch with his students, and they watch. And they watch him walking and walking, and then from a distance, they see a carriage rumbling down the road. The inn is walking away from the inn. The carriage stops. You can see it's a nice carriage. And there's a brief conversation they could see that's being had between the whoever's in the carriage and the innkeeper. And then the carriage continues on towards them, towards the inn, and then suddenly it stops. It turns around. It goes back towards the innkeeper. Stops by the innkeeper. There's a brief exchange, and suddenly they see how the man in the carriage hands a bag of money to the innkeeper. And then the carriage turns around again and comes towards the inn. So when it gets to the inn, they can hear what the story is. So the man comes out of the carriage, and they said, "We saw that you had a conversation with the innkeeper. What was going on between the two? You left, and then you went back." So he said, "Oh, I was traveling to the inn because I know the innkeeper. I know him to be a very trustworthy man. And I wanted to buy off his entire stock of liquor for the coming winter. I need a lot of big stock of liquor. It's probably vodka. That was the standard drink. It was before bourbon became popular. So they asked, so what happened that you left and then you went back and gave him the money? So he said, well, I told the innkeeper how much I'm willing to pay. And the innkeeper said, no, I won't sell it for that price. This is the amount I need. What was the amount the innkeeper told the man? The exact amount he needs to pay the rent, right? Because if God's sending him a business deal, clearly, why is Hashem sending him the business deal? So he can pay off the rent. So he wouldn't settle for anything less than the rent. So he said, no, it's got to be, the price is higher. So the driver said, that's too much money. And he continued moving on. But when he was moving on, he thought to himself, I know this man's such a trustworthy man. Why wouldn't I give him the amount that he's asking for? It's definitely a fair price. So I turned around, I went to him and I said, you know what, I'll pay you that amount. And I gave him the money. So Hashem was showing his students the unbelievable power of someone who truly has faith in Hashem. Now, clearly, how do we know this man truly had faith in Hashem? How do we know? There's really only one thing in the story that tells it to us, or maybe two things. The one thing clearly that tells us in the story that he had faith in Hashem, that he had full trust in Hashem, was the fact that he was calm. That's how you know. Now, we shouldn't be disappointed when we are working on trusting in Hashem and we're not calm. Please don't be disappointed one iota. I will just say, welcome to the club. However, you will find that with time, your worry will decrease. It really will decrease. Your anxiety really will decrease. And you'll see that when similar circumstances repeat themselves a few months later or a year later or 2 years later, and you are much more calm about it. Like everything's going to be fine. So with that, with that inspiration, let's continue where we're at. We were talking about the 5 benefits in material matters that the Rabbi Yehuda ibn Pekudah is telling us that we get when we trust in Hashem. The first 3 that we already learned was that we will be stress-free. You see, this man was stress-free. There was such a big concern that he had no answer to, no reasonable answer to at all, and he was stress-free. He immune from fatigue of traveling. That someone who has trust in Hashem won't have to exhaust themselves in their service of Hashem. I had a very good conversation with Roseanne about this because she raised a very good question, and that is, what do you mean? Sometimes we take on a job which is exhausting, right? So I differentiated between one who feels that they are forced to do work that is detrimental to their health because that's the only way they can make a living, which means that there's no reliance on Hashem, there's just reliance on what they believe they must do, so they're forced to do something, and someone who chooses to exert themselves because of a mission that they have, of a purpose that they have. So, for example, there may be a person, by way of example, I would say that my job is definitely not a stress-free job. Not that it's more stressful than any other job, but it's not a stress-free job, but it's a mission job, right? Likewise, when someone knows that they're cut out for business, they're good at business. There are people who are gifted at business. and they want to maximize, whatever it is. It could be multiple things that one can gain through business, which is many other spiritual benefits of connections, of influence, of all these different things, and therefore they exert themselves in that way, right? But they're not the victim. I'll describe it this way: they're not the victim of exhaustion. They are they are taking on the opportunity of exhausting themselves for a certain purpose. So that he's referring to a fatigue of traveling that one feels they have to do. And that's true also for harm-free employment, which was the third benefit, that one is not forced to go into an employment which is harmful to a person's health or whatever it may be. And I think I said this last week, that may be the reason why Jews, at least on some level, know that, we don't play the sports where you get injured. We own the teams, right? So just a humorous way of expressing the idea that we don't have to, when a person trusts in Hashem, we don't feel that we have to do things which are going to be detrimental to our health, which is the way many people live. Now we're up to number 4. And number 4 is on page 33, that there's no distress. Among the material benefits is that a person who has bitachon will have less anguish in business. If, for example, he cannot sell his merchandise, or if he's not able to collect a debt that is owed to him, right? So what happens in such a case? In such a scenario, usually people get filled with distress. But in this case, a person won't get filled with distress. Or if he's not able to collect a debt that is owed to him, this can be super stressful, distressing. Why? It's interesting. If I don't sell merchandise, okay, I don't sell merchandise. But if someone owes me money and I can't get the money from them, for some reason that often stresses us even more, because we feel like this person is taking advantage of me. They're getting the better of me. They're belittling me. Or if he becomes physically ill, what happens to a person that you can't work if one's physically ill? So naturally, a person would become upset or even angry if any of these things happen. Nevertheless, a person who has bitachon will not let these things upset him. Why not? This is because he knows that the Creator, may he be blessed, repairs his matters better than he can and chooses what is good for him, better than what he would choose for himself. He trusts fully that Hashem is doing this for me because this is ultimately for my good. And we're going to have a further discussion about this hopefully today, about Hashem giving us good, even though it doesn't always look good. And when I trust, I say, okay, this is what Hashem knows is best for me right now. As it says in Tehillim, Psalms chapter 62, only to God should you hope. My soul, for my hope is from him. So God knows what is best for a person, and as such, a person's hope should be placed only in Hashem. So what happens? I'm not distressed. I have challenges, they don't distress me. They're interesting circumstances Hashem sent before me, and I'm going to face it. And the last thing, which is what seems pretty much everyone in the world is seeking, which is a good thing to seek, is happiness. A person who trusts in Hashem is always happy. In addition to refusing to get upset when things do not go as planned, a person who has bitachon can actually rejoice with whatever comes his way. Among the material benefits is that a person who has bitachon is happy with whatever is forced upon him, even if it is difficult and against his nature. If you look at on the bottom of the page where it says against his nature, even if a person's current life experiences make it difficult for him to be naturally happy, and it takes courage to see things in a good light, the person who has bitachon remains happy. At the end, as when we remember that these circumstances Hashem has given me, then we're happy. I'm here. Why am I in this world? For a divine mission. And Hashem is setting up a very customized mission for me. Not quite what I would choose for myself. My day would be a lot more pleasant without it. But here I am on my divine mission. He is able to be happy because of his trust in God, that he will only do to him that which is good for him in all matters. Just as a caring mother does for her newborn child when she washes, diapers, swaddles, and unswaddles him, even if it is against the newborn's will. Right? What happens? The baby cries when you give the baby, sometimes you give the baby a bath, right? When you change the baby's diaper. Why is the mother doing this? I could see in our deranged world a campaign one day, that against mothers because they make their babies cry, just because of the backwardness of our world today. But of course, the mother's doing it all out of love. So and this, by the way, I like this analogy because it's a great analogy for us to keep things in perspective. We keep in perspective that Hashem is doing everything for us out of his love for us. Just like a mother will do something to a child that will make the child cry. Right? A child has a splinter, so you have to remove the splinter. Right? It's very painful for the child, but it's very important for the child so he doesn't get an infection. So a loving mother will remove it. An unloving mother will leave it. So we remind ourselves in the very same way Hashem puts different things in our lives, because that is what Hashem is doing for us out of his great love for us. Okay, so here we're going to read a very important and somewhat spiritual footnote on the bottom of page 34, where it says, "Only do to him that which is good for him." That Hashem will only do to him that which is good for him. The Medrash makes a very radical statement, and I think that this idea that we're going to learn now in the footnote is very important in complementing all of our trust in Hashem. And I'm going to say that this idea is really I'm going to call it an academically spiritual idea. When I say something is an idea, what I mean is that it's not necessarily our experiential awareness that knows this. It may only be our brain that knows this once we're done learning it. The challenge of that is that when something is experiential, it's our experience, then we live it. But when something is an idea, it's a nice idea, which while my experience is feeling otherwise, I try and tap into that idea. And I'm saying that to say that you shouldn't expect that you would be aligned with this idea experientially, but you can integrate this idea into your experience repeatedly, and then with time, it will become part of your experiential experience of things. Okay, so the Alter Rebbe, so the Medrash states a radical statement. When I say radical, by the way, I don't mean that it's radical in the way that we don't embrace it. I mean it's an idea that to the human mind may seem extreme. That's what I mean. But it's a radically beautiful idea. And sometimes we can only milk the like that phrase of just milking something for what it's worth. We can only really milk out all of the benefits of bitachon through embracing this radical idea. So sometimes we got to get radical in order to really get everything you can out of something. So what's the idea? Nothing bad descends from heaven. Ein ra yored malmayla. There is no bad that descends from above. Could you imagine such a thing? Right? This idea, with all of the challenges that we have in life, it's hard to imagine that. I mean, what's even the basis to say such a thing? How can you say that no bad comes from above? But that is the truth, by the way. So let's just establish that for a moment. The truth is no bad descends from on high. The question is how we can understand that or relate to that. So the Alter Rebbe of Shner Zalman of Liadi writes the following reflection. When a person contemplates in depth and then pictures in his mind how he comes into being as something from nothing at every single moment, he is affected at every moment of his existence by the divine energy that animates him, which is God's attribute of Chachma, the source of life, good, and delight. How can he entertain a thought that he is suffering? If God is giving me existence every single moment, then I know that everything that's going on in my existence is coming from God. Such a thought that I am suffering is only possible, the Alter Rebbe continues, because the good is not comprehensible. He imagines that he's suffering in truth, that he's suffering. Let's go back to our analogy of the baby. When a baby, let's talk about a baby who's, a year old. So they're already aware of themselves and of other things, right? And now they see their mother, who they're very much aware of, doing something to them that's hurting them, that's making them uncomfortable. So they're crying. Why is the mother doing it? Because it's the benefit of the baby. If I don't change the baby's diaper, number one, they're going to smell. Number two, they're going to get a rash. It's going to be much worse, right? Etc. So it's all for the good of the baby. The mother's understanding and the baby's understanding is completely different. So the reason why the baby is suffering is simply because the baby doesn't understand what the mother's doing, the goodness of the mother. If the baby understood, the baby wouldn't be crying. She would give the mother a big hug and say, thank you so much. Don't expect that from a 1-year-old. But that's what, if they had that understanding, that's what they would do, right? So in the very same way, the Alter Rebbe is saying that when we experience things in this world which are not good, it's simply our lack of understanding of what God is doing, and we're not comprehending it. So how do we comprehend it? How we're experiencing it as bad, as uncomfortable, to say the least, right? It can be very painful too. But that doesn't change what it is. So in truth, however, no evil descends from above, and everything is good. In this case, it is not comprehended as such. In this case, where a person's suffering, the person is not comprehending it as good because of its immense and abundant goodness at a level that is inconceivable to man. Now, here he says a major irony. This is all explained in Tanya, by the way. Deeper into Tanya. That's like probably summertime Tanya when we get in the annual cycle. But when something is abundantly good, then the goodness is too much for me to even comprehend. By way of example, I don't know if you have this experience, but I've had this experience with different people. Beginning, to be honest with you, with my wife. There are certain people whose goodness I could not trust to be truly good because it was too good to believe. Right? There are certain people who are so good to other people that I couldn't for a number of years, like really wrap my mind around it. Such acts of selflessness and goodness, it's impossible. You don't really mean it. There's some agenda here, right? But after some time, even a thick-headed skull like mine awakens to the fact that at this point, I think they really mean it, right? That's an example for me of how I would relate to this. The goodness is so much that you can't believe that it's good. So sometimes there's such an intense goodness, a love from God that the human being can't process it. And when we can't process something, you know what we experience? We experience pain. Because we can't process the goodness. Like the goodness of an ice cream, we can relate to very easily. But right, the goodness of someone helping me, I can relate to very easily. Can I relate as easily to the goodness of me helping someone else? Right? So that it starts shifting a little bit now. Right? Not that we all do, I know we all appreciate and value the goodness of doing something with someone else, but I'm just trying to make a contrast of which one is very stark and clear, and which one starts to fade depending on how difficult it is to do that goodness for someone else. So this is this irony that the Alter Rebbe explains, that when we experience something in this world where our experience of it is negative, that is because it's in more intense goodness than the things that we experience in this world as good. So this is the essence, I'm continuing now, this is the essence of faith for which man was created. This is the essence of faith, to believe that there is no place void of God. And in the light of the king's countenance, there is life. That means that everything going on is in the reality of God. And God is here right now. Accordingly, strength and gladness are in his place. We say this every morning, by the way, in the davening. It would be good if you can connect it with the first paragraph of davening that we start with in the main part of davening is Hoidol Hashem. And over there we say, Oiz, a quote from, I believe it's from Tehillim. Yes, it's from Oiz v'chedva b'makoymai. Oiz means strength, and chedva means joy, are in his place. That when one stands in the place of God, in the reality of God, a person will always be strong, and the person will always be happy. Because God is only good all the time. Therefore, first of all, man ought to be happy and joyous at every time and hour, despite the inevitable changes in life, and truly live by this faith in God, who animates him and acts kindly toward him at every moment. Now, I wouldn't expect that you're going to be jumping for joy every time you experience something negative, because you learned this. But this is the beginning of understanding, at least reminding yourself that even though I'm entrenched in this experience, which is bad, and I can't get out of that, my head can still know that there is a concept, which is more than a concept, it's a reality, which for me is not yet a reality, that really this is goodness from God that I just can't, in such a high level of goodness that I can't experience it in my level as goodness, and I'm experiencing it as something negative. We're going to have another analogy from the Rebbe in just a moment that will help as well. So let's go back to the top of the page. So he is able to be happy because of his trust in God, that he will only do to him that which is good for him in all matters, just as a caring mother. Okay, we went through all of that. Let's go to page 35. So this means that a person knows that everything Hashem does for me is for the good. And whenever I'm experiencing something negative, hold on to this analogy, by the way. I think it's a very simple analogy. When I experience something negative, I just remember the child. Just remember the baby whose diaper is being changed. In the same manner that a mother occasionally does things against her child's will because it is really for the good of the child, so too God sometimes does things to a person that seem to him as not good, and therefore against his will, but are ultimately in his best interest. Now, one can say, well, how do you know that everything Hashem does is in my best interest? I mean, it surely doesn't seem that way. I can't imagine why this would be my best interest. This is my worst interest. That's why we call it trust in God. It requires trust. And we're going to be learning soon what attributes, which is going to be in chapter 2, primarily, what attributes a person needs for us to be able to, in fact, trust them. And once we learn about that, it's going to start becoming a lot easier for us to realize why Hashem is trustworthy. We should be trusting in Hashem. So it's gonna come together more and more as we move on. So as King David of blessed memory said in Tehillim, I swear that I calmed and quieted my soul like a suckling on its mother. Like a suckling was my soul with me. Can you imagine the deep expressions that King David uses, the rich metaphors he's used? That just like a baby, right? Can a baby feel any safer being nursed by her mother? Right? In the same way, that's how King David related to Hashem. I'm constantly being nursed by Hashem. Although King David had many troubles, he remained calm because he considered himself like a suckling on his mother. He believed that everything God was doing to him was for his best. Okay, so we're going to do one other big footnote, everyone, which is another critical footnote, which is on the bottom of page 35. We're just going to start where it says the Lubavitcher Rebbe writes. This is a common analogy the Rebbe repeatedly wrote on letters to people. It's a fantastic analogy, by the way. It has certain elements which maybe are not included in the newborn child and a mother. The Lubavitcher writes, imagine a person unfamiliar with advances in medical science, entering a hospital operating room and observing a person lying on the operating table. Around this patient are people holding knives and cutting him, all while the person is groaning with pain. Not understanding the surgical procedure, the observer will leave the room in an uproar, shouting that a human being has been taken and is being cut, and that he is groaning in pain and unable to free himself from his tormentors. Literally, imagine you take a third world person and bring him into a modern day operating room. He'll lose his mind. He will literally lose his mind. He sees them cutting open a chest and starting to play with a person's heart. He'll lose his mind. And this is a great analogy for us, again, to see that our mindset and the reality can be very, very different. In fact, diametrically opposed, where I think murder is being committed and actually a life-saving procedure is being committed. However, when this observer is given to understand that the operation is critical for the patient, so that the latter may live many more decades, and for which reason serious consideration is not being given to the patient's temporary discomfort, the observer will not only agree that they, the cutters, are not tormentors and murderers, but he will understand that the very opposite is true. They are doing the greatest possible favor to the individual who is under the knife. I just want to say that, in my opinion, this is exactly what Israel's doing now. They're committing a surgery within humanity, which is to the benefit of all of humanity. And there are primitive people who don't understand that, for whatever reasons, and for whatever agendas. And God forbid that a surgeon would stop a surgery because he's surrounded by some primitive people who think that what the surgeon is doing is bad. We understand from this, I'm continuing, we understand from this that a person may experience true pain. That means, is the patient experiencing true pain? They sure are. This is a very critical component to this. There can be things that Hashem does where I'm really suffering, really, really suffering. And we don't need an education on being in touch with suffering. That's very natural. That person, however, is also aware of the divine hand of individual providence. But the person can alleviate, if not alleviate, at least the person can create the ability to carry the suffering. You see, the key with suffering is not whether we're suffering or not, but whether I can manage this. Can I carry myself through this or not? Is this going to overwhelm me and destroy me? Or am I going to carry this with me the rest of my life? Which is never pleasant, because the rest of my life I have this element within me. But the ability to carry it comes from that knowing that Hashem is doing this for goodness, even though I cannot see the goodness. That gives me the ability, so I'm still suffering. It gives me the ability to carry the suffering, to have the shoulders, the broad shoulders. That's why a person who has trust in Hashem, their shoulders are broad. What they can carry in life is so much greater than what an average person can carry. Right? You think about it this way. You look at a family with 10 kids. Say, how do you do that? It's a good question, by the way. I'm not sure many of the families who have 10 kids quite know how they do it. It's not a science, but it's trust actually that does it. They have the shoulders to do it because of the trust. So, and by the way, I'll say this too. To the extent that the parents have trust is the extent to which it's a burden or a lack of a burden. I say to the extent that the parents don't have trust, the more of a burden it actually is. To the extent that the parents do have trust, the less of a burden that it is, and the more of a blessing that it is. It's that simple. It doesn't make it easy, right? The parents can suffer from it in the sense of, it's a bad word to use in this context, but it means that their lives can be made more difficult because of it. And there's no question that it is. However, it's a blessing. So in another letter, the Rebbe writes, quite often a person does not truly know what is in his best interests. And even when an individual concludes that he knows with 100% certainty that the thing is good for him, he still cannot possibly know the reasons why he has not been currently granted these matters. We cannot know. So to bring an example from the business world, a good and experienced business person will not sell his merchandise at an inopportune time, even when he can realize a profit, but reckons that by selling his merchandise at a later date, he can realize a far greater profit. He knows that, so he's going to hold off. The same is so with God's goodness. If it is delayed, it is in all probability because at a later time, God's blessing will be in a much greater manner. It could be that we won't be able to appreciate the blessing fully now. Hashem's waiting for a time where we can benefit more from the blessing. It could be that the blessing will serve us much greater at a later time, which we don't realize and don't know. There are probably an infinite number of possibilities. And when one trusts in Hashem, that's the way one looks at this. Just a moment, I'm seeing now the chat. Should our daily disappointments and troubles to be accepted as for the are to be accepted as for the good, and even more significant hardships, mortgage foreclosure, okay, to recognize as good, and how? Okay, that's the question. Joyce, that's your question, right? Yeah, okay, that's a great question.
I realize that's the whole purpose of this class.
Yeah. Well, that's the question.
I'm not even talking about, God forbid, death of a child or, something beyond comprehension. But, obviously, you probably hear more about these things as a rabbi with the congregation than most of us do. And I know you don't tell them all it's for the good. But, I learned that in another class from you. But, there are true difficult, I'm not just talking about, I missed the traffic light, I was late for an appointment. Those minor things. But, fertility issues, having to, losing a house to the mortgage. These are hard things. And even to say, well, I guess if God did it, it's for the best. How does a person accept that?
Well,
so, even if it's a 78-year-old gets cancer, all right, everybody knows we're going to die sometime. But nobody's happy to accept it.
Correct. You're bringing the what we're discussing right to the heart of the matter. It really is not so relevant what people do, because we're not looking at the people for our guidance. We're looking at the book, at the Torah for our guidance, right? And like I always say, never judge Judaism by the people, right? The fact that people behave a certain way doesn't mean Judaism is lacking in any way, but it does mean that we as humans are, we struggle a lot to have trust, but there are exemplary people, exemplary in that sometimes they are gifted, but often they made the effort to really apply this. And instead of saying, no one does it, which is some form of social evidence to us that we don't need to expect it from ourselves, right? To saying, I want to live this way. So I'm going to go down the road of implementing this to the best of my ability. And I'll evolve to the extent that I do. And there are people who actually, they're not as common, right? But there are people who do have suffering. And there are people who, you see, I've been exposed to certain people, which has been a gift for me, who did almost lose their home or their building or their whatever it is because of their inability to pay mortgages, and they carry that much better. I can't say they carried it perfectly, but they carried it far better than most people do. It didn't completely overwhelm them. They were concerned about it. They tried to deal with it, this and that. So there are, to the extent that we trust in Hashem, yes, it will not overwhelm us nearly as much, and we will have a much better disposition. And in fact, I think this is important to point out as well, we will deal with the situation much better. Overwhelmed people are not very productive. They usually are counterproductive. Angry people are not very productive. They usually they do what they shouldn't be doing, right? So the more trust that we have, actually, it serves on every single front. But it's also, and I think this is the critical point I want to emphasize, it's living in the truth. The truth is that if there's meant to be my home is meant to go into foreclosure, that means that for some reason that's a goodness that Hashem knows to bestow upon me, then it will go into foreclosure. And the truth also is that if it's not meant to go into foreclosure, and Hashem's going to give me this goodness some other way, then it won't go into foreclosure. Because I know that I can trust fully that Hashem will only do what is good for me. And that's the truth, whether we're aligned with it or not. And it's always best to live in truth. There's no better way to live than in truth. And I know it's challenging, but I also want to say that we shouldn't get stuck in, well, who does this? Oh, is this really realistic? No, it's not. It's not realistic. And we're not realistic. And we're aspiring to be greater than realistic. That's exactly what we're doing. Okay? I hope that helps somewhat. I try to ask Hashem for guidance, opportunities, or whatever I'm supposed to know about the situation to help. It works every time based on what Hashem wants for the situation. Beautiful. And so Stacy says she experiences this in her life, and I suppose that we all do more or less in different situations. Often it's in hindsight, and our idea is to get this into foresight too. Okay. Beautiful. Okay, so let's continue. We're on page 35, the 7 chapters of the Gate of Trust. So now, it's amazing how, by the way, to me, it's just amazing how Rabbeinu ibn Pekudah structured this section of his duties of the heart. First, he tells us the benefits, which is like a great way to really position a very difficult way of living like this, to first see what the benefits are. Then he lays out, okay, now I'm going to tell you what the 7 chapters, because there are 7 chapters to the Gate of Trust, are going to discuss. He gives us the names of the chapters, so to speak, and then we're going to start with chapter 1. So he says, since I have explained that which has occurred to me pertaining to the benefits of having trust in God, and its benefits, both in regard to Torah matters and in regard to worldly pursuits, I will now explain 7 matters pertaining to bitachon. Each chapter will address a different aspect of bitachon. So the first element is, just a moment. The first element is, what is trust? Chapter number 1 is going to be, what is trust? You have to define what you're talking about always before you talk about it. So he's going to define what trust actually is. The second factor is the causes that enable a person to trust in another. What factors are needed so that one can trust? Right? What factors are necessary there for me to be able to trust it? Chapter number 3 is to explain the prerequisites due to which a person is obligated to have trust in God, as well as to explain the obligation to engage in the means to pursue a livelihood. What is it that will compel us to trust in God? What will we see in God, learn about God, that will compel us to trust in God? And why, at the very same time, we are still obligated to pursue a livelihood? This is a big point of confusion for many people. Of course, we say, well, if I trust in God, God's taking care of me. I'm retired now. I have trust. No. Doesn't work. Why doesn't it work? It's not what Hashem wants. So we're going to see. Because if the person that we trust in says that I want you to do a certain thing, we have to trust that that's what we should do. The chapter number 4 is to explain the matters regarding which a person should trust in God, as well as when it is praiseworthy to have trust and when it is not. When should we put our trust in Hashem and when shouldn't we? Which is an interesting idea, that we shouldn't put our trust in Hashem certain times. When is that? We'll find out in chapter 4. That's going to be in a while. Chapter number 5, the difference between how a man who has trust in God engages in the pursuit of livelihood and how a man who does not have trust in God engages in it. What does a man who has trust in God look like when he goes to work every day? And what does a man who doesn't have trust in God, what does he look like when he goes to work every day? And that contrast is very good for us to be able to assess ourselves, to see how aligned we are with trust in Hashem. Chapter number 6 is to explain the ways in which logic dictates. So he's going to show us how logically, it dictates that a person must criticize the opinion of those who say that people should engage in the pursuit of worldly pleasures and delay accepting upon themselves the service of God until they obtain their materialistic desires, whom the author refers to as the owners of security pledges. Some people say, look, one second. First, I got to get a job, got to make a livelihood, I got to have savings in the bank for the next 10 years. Now I can trust in God. Now I can start coming to synagogue. Now I can start praying, right? In other words, I want to make sure I'm secure first. That's why he calls you the owner of security pledges. God, give me security, and once you give me security, then I'll trust in you. No, that's not trust. You have everything guaranteed, and then you're going to trust in me, even though nothing is ever guaranteed. But right, but you want to feel a sense of guarantee, and then you're going to trust me. You're weakening your ability to trust in me. Because if you're trusting in me only on security, you're not really trusting. The whole power of trust is that I don't need security. Hashem is my security. So why logically securing oneself before trust is mistaken? That's very important, because the critical moments of trust, where we need to have trust in Hashem, are moments where we don't have the security. And then the last chapter, 7, on page 37, to explain those matters that hinder a person's trust in God. That's important to take them on. What are the things that hinder our trust in Hashem? And also to elaborate on all that we need to discuss regarding the matter of trust, and to summarize the levels of trust. Okay, so summary is placing trust in God brings tranquility in all areas of a person's life. It allows him to serve God with more peace and affords him an anxiety-free lifestyle. Chapter 1. We're just going to dip our toes into chapter 1, okay? Because we don't have much time, more time today. But let's just warm up, and then we'll review it again next week. In this very short chapter, this is the shortest chapter, I believe. The author defines the very essence of bitachon. What is trust? Right? You remember that was what we said chapter 1 is. What is trust? As well as the primary factor that causes a person to have bitachon. What's the primary factor that will cause one to trust? So he says the essence of trust is the peace of mind of the person who has trust. Trust is, I'm going to tell you the Hebrew terminology. It's a beautiful terminology. It's called menuchas hanefesh. Menuchas hanefesh means peace of mind. Peace of mind. Things happen in life. Peace of mind. They don't rattle me. That is trust. And that's the story of the Baal Shem Tov that I told you at the beginning of today's class. How do you know if you trust in Hashem, if you're at peace? And that he relies on the person in whom he is trusting. And trust is the ability to rely on the person that you're trusting. Rely on them for what? That he, the person in whom he is trusting, will do good and correct thing, the good and correct thing for him. That means he will do good and the correct thing for the one who trusts in the matter regarding which he's trusting him. My ability to trust you simply means that I believe it's clear to me that you will only do what is good for me in this matter that I'm trusting you with. That means if I give you my money to invest, what do I mean when I say I trust you as a financial, I don't know what's called, investor or whatever it is, or advisor, right? I trust you will do what is best for me with this money. I may be losing money, making money, but I trust you are always doing what is best for me. Then I can trust you. That's trust. According to his ability and knowledge. And how are you going to do good to me? To the best of your ability, right? Your ability may be very limited, but to the best of your ability and the best of your knowledge, to bring that which is good for him into actuality. That I trust you're going to do what is good for me and bring that into actuality. Let's go to the next page just to get this is really the whole first chapter, and then we're going to review it next week with some of the footnotes. But the main thing, see it on page 41? But the main thing, as a result of which the trusting person will trust, and without which he will not trust, what's the main thing is that he is certain that, number one, the person upon whom he's relying will follow through on that which he said and do what he promised to do. The first thing is that you are absolutely sure that this person will do what he says he's going to do. That's trusting the person. And two, the person he's trusting even has in mind to do good with him that which he had never stipulated or assumed responsibility to do. That he will do it as an act of generosity and kindness. My full trust I put into a person who not only is going to do what they said they're going to do, but if they have the opportunity to do good for me, which they never agreed to do, that out of their generosity and kindness, they will do that too. They are fully committed to me. That means I have full trust in them, full trust in them. This person only will only do for my good. And not only that which we agreed upon, we have an agreement about, but even things that we don't have an agreement about, because they are totally committed to me. That's what trust is. So now we have a definition of trust, and that's the end of chapter 1. But we're going to discuss it a little bit more because we want to really milk it for all it's got. So we'll do that. We'll do that next week, and yeah, and then we'll move on to chapter 2.